All righty.
There you go, blue bonnets and all.
Blue bonnets and all. Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Virtual Father Conference. This is the second Thursday in July for us. If you were not with us last Thursday, I had a link to the session for last Thursday that you can watch on YouTube. If you did not receive that, reach out to me. I'll be glad to hook you up with that, up with the rest of us. But I would like to thank you for being here this afternoon. I am Jada Camp. I'm the Fatherhood Support Coordinator for Fatherhood Effect program here at Buckner. I'm joined by my supervisor, Cindy Moore, and my Director of Programs, Jeff Ross. I'd like to introduce to you, and even though we've already been chatting and you met him last week, quickly, J. Michael Hall. J. Michael Hall has a master's in education. He is also the founder of Strong Fathers and Strong Families and has been recognized for his work in education. Mike has worked with over 300 schools, and his topic of discussion is dads and their families. Mike, I would like to turn this program over to you.
All right, let me find I got to find myself here. There we go. How's that? So hopefully I found myself. You guys can see that. Glad you guys are here. If you were not with it, now I can see my collar. If you were not with us last week, one of the ways we're going to check roll is if your name, your whole name, is on your account where we can see it right now, just type in here in the chat. If it's not your full name, or if you're on somebody else's account, or it's a group account, type in your name plus here. You don't have to change your name on your account per se, but just type in your name and tell us that you're here. Also, tell us if this is your first session, so we kind of know. You know, we won't review a whole lot, but we may want to go back and touch on that if we have quite a few of you that weren't here last time. And so we'll have a handful of folks that join us here in a minute if this is anything like most workshops I've been doing or church. So y'all know how that works. But in the everybody put here, or, you know, second session, like you guys were here for the first one and you came back, which is it's quite touching to me. I'm like, man, these are the tough ones. But I thought we had a good session last time, even though the speaker was a bit sketchy, and was really appreciate your input and the questions that you guys asked. We've already had a few questions coming in. And so feel free to drop those questions in. If I don't see them, Cindy or Jada will see those, and we'll go back over those. What I have learned over now I've done webinars, done a few things for the last 5-10 years, I guess, back when everything was WebEx or even before that. But been doing Zoom, of course, for about 5 years since I'm pretty virtual with a lot of the work I do because I travel quite a bit. But I do find that if we break it up too much and get off on questions, not only does that take away my focus, a lot of times it'll take away yours, or want to kind of give you all the content, because a lot of times we'll answer your questions as we go, but feel free to put those in there. And, you know, if I do see them and it's something that kind of jumps out at me, I'll either make sure I address it, or we may just jump out, address it, and jump back in. But most of it we can do at the end. So I'm going to jump in here, make sure all my settings are right. And so for those of you that are just joining us, I am the president and founder of Strong Fathers, Strong Families. We do work with dads and kids. Our bread and butter is working in educational environments, public schools, and Head Start's early childhood environments. And we do that all over the country. I have written curriculum for guys in child support court. We've used that same curriculum in CPS cases or CPS classes, halfway houses, reentry programs, inside, outside prison. You know, so we have several of those things. Real quick, here's what I call my credentials. This is my wife, who was an elementary teacher for 17 years. By the way, I'm the guy in the suit. You may not recognize me, but I'm the guy in the suit to the far left. But she was an elementary teacher for 17 years, spent about 10 years in middle school, and she finally went to high school. She's going to high school this year, a reading teacher all the way through. The young lady there in the middle is my daughter in love. This was last April. So they've made it past that year mark and found out kind of a struggle. And we're like, yep, we know. We've been married 31 years ourselves. And then the tall young man to the right is actually my son, and acts just like me and has the same color beard as I used to have. And that is Josh is the tall one. Jake is the one getting married there. Jake is 28. Josh is 24. My wife is 31 is what I'm supposed to tell you. Because I said life started when you married me. And she goes, well, something like that. So wanted to show you kind of where we're coming from, because you'll hear about these guys through some of our stories today. Everybody but the daughter-in-law, I think. I don't think I have a daughter-in-law story yet, or at least I don't have permission to talk about it if I have anything. I probably don't have permission from my sons. My son is actually doing a podcast, and then he calls his brother and adds him to the podcast. And I'm really afraid to listen to it, because I'm like, what kind of fatherhood stuff is about to come out of these guys? So you can go find it, but I'm probably not going to listen to it. It may hurt my feelings, because I'm kind of tender that way. Last week, we talked about the roles of moms, the roles of dads, the strengths of moms, the strengths of dads, and how they kind of fit together and how they work together and where the conflict is. And a lot of you responded pretty naturally to that. That's kind of the response we get, was never thought about it that way, or holy moly, have you been in my house? And that always kind of lends itself to the fact that we know this stuff is true because it resonates with so many people. It's not true because I thought about it or wrote about it. It's true because people keep coming back and going, that's how I see it. I can see it that way now, those kind of things. So we laid that out. And if you didn't get to watch the first video, we did put it up on YouTube. We'll get you the link. I don't think you're going to miss anything today because you didn't see that, but they definitely do fit together. And we'll kind of refer back to some of the things we talked about last week. The next question I tend to ask in any of my workshops is, what are the positive outcomes for kids when fathers are engaged? And the work at Buckner and the work with Fatherhood Effect really across the country, because I'm working with several grantees on this program. Like I said, I wrote a 10-week curriculum that's really in a social service sphere, if you will. It is man work. It is manhood work. It is that kind of work as well. But when we talk about fatherhood, the reason that we do what we do at Strong Fathers is because we want to do what we can do to impact the lives of kids. So when I talk about fatherhood, I'm not really focused on necessarily the outcomes for hairy-legged men. I see great things happen to hairy-legged men. I see hairy-legged men make amazing changes. But my personal work, the work that we do at Strong Fathers, is to impact men in such a way, men that are fathers in such a way that their kids have better outcomes. I don't think you said this in the intro, I'm not sure. I'm a former special education teacher. I'm a recovering middle school principal, still twitch a little bit. And that was what got me started in this work. So some of the stats we're going to talk about today are definitely educational, but we'll talk about why that works, because it's going to lend itself to the work that you guys are doing. And we may have a little bit of extra Q&A time at the end to kind of massage some of this stuff into your work. Because last week, I asked you to kind of hang with us so we could lay that foundation of strengths of moms, strengths of dads, because we as professionals just want to know, what do I do? You know, what I do next, or what can I do? I got to do something. Well, if you don't have the why, the what won't work for you over time, and you can't develop new what or how if you don't know the why. So I always find that we go to the why, we lay that foundation out, and then it begins to inform us on how we're going to kind of act. So we want to kind of do that today. And Jeff, you alluded to this. We're going to kind of lay out some stats and research on this. So the reason I work with fathers is because of what it means for kids. There are some programs that will call themselves, and I'm not talking about Effect because I know how they're addressing this, but there are some fatherhood programs that on the surface, or really at the heart, are really man programs, not fatherhood programs, because they're worried about jobs, they're worried about education, they're worried about getting your record fixed, all those kind of things, which I think is fine work. And I think I have a lot of fatherhood work that ties to that. So I don't think that's necessarily disconnected, but so many times we focus on the dude and not the part of the dad. And so what we want to focus on today is, okay, as a father, why do we want to do this work? Why are we working with fathers? And I'm giving you my kind of focus on that is because of what it does for kids. And so that's what we're going to talk about. So let's talk about what are the positive outcomes for kids when fathers are engaged. And a lot of people that have done some of this work or start to listen to us about this work don't always understand how dad's role plays in at a very early age. And so fathers play a vital role in their child's development, even to the point of, we're glad to have a part in conception, but what we also know is that right after conception, we begin to have an impact. I'm trying to think how many years ago it was. In the state of Texas, Michael Hayes was at the Attorney General's office and actually did a first 9 months of fatherhood. We had a big workshop and a big kind of a one-day symposium. One of my heroes, one of my guys, mentors, T. Barry Brazelton was there, and we talked about what kind of impact does a dad have during pregnancy. And there's a ton of research that shows when dads are engaged during the pregnancy, these kids do better. To the point of when he's talking around the child, around the mom, that's, the child that's inside the mom, that has an impact on their cognitive ability and their development. When the dad is there to take her to doctor visits, when dad's there, she's less likely to use alcohol, drugs. She's less likely to smoke and do risky behaviors during her pregnancy because she's got a partner in that. And so what some of the research says is that if a dad is there during the pregnancy, his child is 4 times more likely to be alive after the first year of life. We know about infant mortality rates. The infant mortality rate is just a horrible stat in and of itself. And then also when we look at the infant mortality rate, particularly in the African-American community. And when we look at that, what we know is, and everybody's got all kinds of plans, and I think a lot of those plans are good, but a lot of times the missing ingredient is we're not reaching out to those men that are fathers, because we know that if we engage them in this work, then that child has a better outcome in their health. Their birth weight is heavier at the day of birth than it would be had dad not been there during the pregnancy. That also impacts the infant mortality rate. The fact that dad's there and gets mom to the doctor visits, that dad's there and helps her, hopefully helps her to make better choices about her own health and risk-taking during her pregnancy, helps that child out. That child's less likely to have cognitive issues because her health is better. The birth weight is better. At the end of that first year, that child's more likely, 4 times more likely to be alive. And so we can't discount dad's role up until the day of birth. And then we know after the day of birth, after that child is born, even on that first day. So the child will respond to dad differently, even at 8 weeks. The day the child is born, if the dad's been around, the child will typically respond to the dad's voice. One of my favorite stories from Barry Brazelton is he had developed a whole kind of battery of tests for a newborn. It was a Brazelton newborn inventory. And he would tell the mom he would hold the baby and he'd say, talk to the baby. And the baby would turn their head towards mom's voice. And he would hold the baby and tell dad, talk to the baby. And the baby, most of the time, would turn their head to the dad. One of my favorite parts about that story is Dr. Brazelton said, and if the baby would not turn their head, he would just kind of slightly and slowly turn their head towards dad, because he wanted to connect that dad and know that dad to know he has that importance. So Michael Yogman out of Yale University did studies with infants. And so they had all kind of wires hooked to this baby. Baby's in a child safety seat or some kind of, kind of held down in an apparatus. I don't think they were strapped down to a gurney, but they were sitting there with all these wires. And so when the screen of the mom's face showed up, when the baby heard their mom's voice, heart rate went down, brain activity decreased, hands and feet stopped moving, shoulders dropped, eyes drooped. Why? Because here comes mom. Every time mom comes in, she does the same thing. She does it this calmly. She's doing these things, right? And so babies respond, and this is like at 6 weeks to 8 weeks. And then of course later as well. And so even as early as that, and babies that young, they would respond to the mother in that way. When the dad would come in on the screen, the baby's heart rate went up, brain activity increased, hands and feet started moving, eyes brightened. because, here comes Disneyland. This guy's not going to pick me up the same way twice. Probably not going to warm up the wipey. It's going to be an exhilarating morning. Here we go. And so babies realize even at that age that dad has a different role. And a lot of times are teaching us as dads, even if dad is not typically comfortable in play with a newborn and a young child, the child will respond to the father the way they want to be responded to. And so, when we had our kids, and then we've worked with so many people that have new babies, they say, well, when the baby does this, that means they're hungry. When the baby does this, that means they want a diaper change, and we as parents are so proud that we understand our child. Well, what's interesting is the research says that children, I think as young as 5-6 weeks, will be, and maybe even younger, I have to look at that, they will change their cues to get what they want. So in other words, if they want a bottle and you're not getting them a bottle, they'll change the way they cry. They'll change the velocity at which they cry. They'll change the ferocity, maybe is the word. They'll change the volume of their cry and the frequency of their cry and the type of cry to get what they want until they get what they want. In other words, we as parents have babies training us to get them what they want. And so kids know this, and they already know what they're expecting kind of out of both parents. They're learning as we're learning as well, but it's amazing how they will respond to dad, both to their face and to their voice. So at 8 weeks, they're going to see that as well. And so one of the things, we're going to talk about it in a second, but we'll talk about verbal skills. When moms talk to kids, most of you don't talk baby talk, but you change your tone and you change your vocabulary when you talk to your children, particularly young children. And what we know is when dads speak to their kids, we don't change our tone and we don't change our vocabulary, maybe sometimes when we ought to change our vocabulary. But because of that, when kids spend time with dads between the ages of 0 and 3, 3 to 5, then that kid has verbal skills that go up by up to 15%. That child actually is more comfortable speaking to adults and has a higher vocabulary because dad doesn't change his tone. And a lot of you moms say, well, I don't change my tone, but the guys know you do, even if they haven't thought about it this way. Guys that are on this call, how many of you have gotten in trouble for being harsh to your children? And we know there are times when we actually are harsh. We know it, they know it. Mom doesn't have to tell us, but she does. And we have to kind of face that. That's a real deal. But a lot of times mom will say, why are you so harsh? You're so harsh. I'm not. What do you mean I'm not harsh? You're so harsh. What? All I said was, eat your peas. Yeah, why are you so harsh? How am I supposed to say, eat your peas? Yeah, guess how I'm not going to say as a dad, eat your peas. But because I don't change my tone, because I don't change my voice, number one, I have kids that understand, I mean eat your peas. I don't mean I'm going to kill you if you don't eat your peas. I just mean eat your peas. It's direct. And kids learn that when they hear that tone or hear it that way, that they're not necessarily in trouble or they're not scared because they're getting it from different sides and different perspectives. And so we know that when dads read to kids, which we'll talk about in a minute, but just the way dads speak to kids changes their vocabulary, changes the way they handle themselves around older children and other adults because of the way they're being spoken to. We do a ton of work about elementary and the fact that dad can have a huge impact on kids in elementary, so much to the fact that if a dad's there in the life of their child when the child is 7 years old in first grade, if the dad is present and involved in their education in basically any way, right? Any way we can say they're involved in their education, that impacts their SAT scores at the age of 16. Even if dad's out of the picture after 7, which by the way, you don't get to quit when you're 7 because you've done when your child's 7. But when dad's there in first grade, it impacts SAT scores, regardless of what happens later, as long as there's not trauma. Same thing goes with teens. When we talk about fathers, one of the things that you've heard, probably since you even heard that we were trying to help fathers be better fathers, was if dads are engaged, if dads are involved, it's less teen crime, less teen pregnancy, higher high school graduation, less high school or college dropouts, and all those things. And all those things are true. But what are we talking about with a 1-year-old, a 2-year-old, a 3-year-old, a 5-year-old? Dad has an impact at every one of these levels. Being around and keeping your kids from being juvenile delinquents is important, but what can dads do to impact all the outcomes that your kids have? So here's some of the research we're going to throw out. If you really, all this is cited. If you really want this, you want to check me, you want to double down on reading great research. And actually, a lot of this stuff is actually pretty easy to read, or I couldn't have used it. But I'm going to kind of read this real quick to you, and then we're going to talk about it. So children who involve fathers tend to have a greater tolerance for stress and frustration, able to be one of many in the classroom. They're able to not deal with not being the center of the universe, maintain focus on their classwork, and have confidence to work on their own. Now, think about the kids that you know. I can tell you as an educator, when I go into a school, almost within 20, 30 minutes, watching kids react, watching kids work, I can tell you who has a father or father figure around and who doesn't, because of the ways that they handle themselves typically in that group. Now, academically, you've got to look a little further, but when you see this, it's all of this stuff. And why is that? So here's what we know. Dads tend to rescue kids a long time, sometimes after mom does, right? And so moms tend to rescue kids quicker, thank goodness. But dads tend to wait a little bit longer. We let our kids handle more frustration than mom typically does, right? And as our kids get older, we see mom kind of stretching that. Dad stretches it way before that. So this is an actual picture from a math night that we had in Keller, Texas. I will tell you, we don't do dress-up math nights. This kid just came out to go to dad and kid math night, had on his vest and his cowboy hat. Dad's like, sure, works for me. Had shorts and boots on because that's probably what dad wanted to wear and couldn't. He's opening a Coke right here. Think about this. If this was a mom and a child, this is a kindergarten or first grader. See, look what's going on right here. What's going on right here is the dad is like, try it. Here, let me show you. You do it. Now, in the long run, because he's a small kid, I was there. I remember this. It's why I have this picture. The dad said, here, do it like this. Kid still couldn't do it. And then the dad took the kid's hand and helped him do it to show him how it would be done when he got strong enough to do it. Think about all the times you've seen a child and a mom together, what typically happens. And there's plenty of moms that say, you try, you do it. But what's typical is mom says, here, let me open that for you. I get it. We tend to let kids handle frustration longer, and we get in trouble for that too. Help him. He's fine. Help him. He'll get it. Help him. He'll get strong enough to get that couch off his chest. Just leave the boy alone. No, help him. And so there are times when I can tell you as a father, and I've seen other fathers like, yeah, you probably should help him a little bit. That's a little bit too frustrating. But what we know is that because dads don't rescue as soon as moms, kids learn to handle frustration. The reason that's important is, number one, is if you can't tell lately, life is frustrating. You're going to have to learn to deal with frustration. The other thing is frustration is inherent to learning. See, without frustration, it's not learning, it's just practice. So it doesn't matter if you're learning in school or you're learning a new skill or you're learning even a soft skill. You're going to be frustrated because you're trying to work on it. And if it's not a challenge, then it's no longer work. If it's not a challenge, it's nothing to learn. But if you have to learn something, you got to bump up against it, and it can be frustrating. So because dads do what we do the way we do it, it helps kids handle frustration better. Just like the research says, keeps kids from thinking they're the center of the universe, right? And you see that a lot in kids that don't have a father figure, or a father playing the role that they should be playing in the life of that kid. They can't understand that there's other people even on the planet, much less in that classroom, much less in the store, much less anywhere else. And so dads, because we do that, like I said, even though we get in trouble for it, this helps our kids in a myriad of different ways. We talk about resiliency. We talk about grit. That's what happens when these kids, so when we're engaged, they have a greater tolerance for stress. They handle frustration. They maintain focus. There's not a one of you, whether you have kids or not, that don't know a kid that has trouble maintaining focus. I had a good dad, still had trouble maintaining focus. Less likely to need extra attention. Why? Because they can work independently and they can work through frustration without melting down. Some of you may have a child or know of a child that has autism, that's on the spectrum. And I think we're diagnosing that better. I think we're seeing it better. But one of the things that I'm seeing in school is there are kids that are giving indications of being on the spectrum, except in all the other ways that would show that they're on the spectrum. But what they will tend to do is melt down, and they melt down when they don't get their way. And it's not their lack of ability to check social cues. And again, you don't know that instantly. It takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of time. But you can see this in kids that there's no other indicating factor, right? And I'm never going to diminish the fact that we have so many kids dealing with autism, but I've seen plenty of kids that have no other indicators that they're on the spectrum, but they have that one indicator that they will just melt down because things aren't going their way, and they've not learned to be resilient. They've not learned to handle frustration. And so we see that. I don't think we get a lot of misdiagnosis, but a lot of times people make assumptions about that kid, and it's not a disability. It's not a difference. It's how they're handling things. So fathers who support their children in less conventional ways, I'm going to stop this for a minute. It's interesting how they write this. May have daughters that are more successful in school and career, and sons who eventually achieve more academically. What we know is schools are not necessarily built for boys. Schools are built for people that will sit still, not boys. That will raise their hand, not boys. That will listen attentively, not boys. Right? And so schools are typically built kind of from that feminine standpoint, that female mindset, and boys really struggle. And so one of the things we know from this research is that when fathers of boys are involved in their education, not only does that boy have a better advocate, but they have somebody that understands that maybe I didn't do well in school either, or I remember the same struggles. So I know you're shocked, but I'm a little ADD. My youngest son really struggled with that in school. Well, I became the guy that helped him do his writing and his projects. Because he's so globally minded, he had trouble putting down one sentence at a time. So I would all but block out the paper and say, just write your beginning sentence. Well, I know all the ideas you have because I have the same struggle when I write. Me writing a curriculum is a Herculean task at times. But, I had to do it the same way. We're going to break it out in outlines. We're going to break it down one sentence at a time. And I had to show my son the same way. His mother, who was a reading teacher who tends to be more linear, was just about to lose her mind over it because she couldn't understand what his struggle was. So dads with boys can see that and become better advocates for their sons. And so I think it's interesting how that research points that out. They don't say boys and girls have exactly the same outcomes, even though they both have better outcomes. So we know that when dads are engaged with the boys, they score higher on intelligence tests. They do better in school, and they score higher on IQ tests and actually on standardized tests typically. Now, the other interesting part is when dads are physically engaged with their daughters. They hug, they high five, they wrestle with the girls just like they wrestle with the boys. These girls who have a close, warm relationship with their fathers have a stronger competency in mathematics, and other research says in science. And so I want you to think about why that would be so. So when dads are physically engaged, their daughters are more likely to do better in math and science. I don't know what just happened there. Look at me, there's two of me. How scary is that to you guys? I have to do that to make this work the way it needs to. So think about this. So when a dad's physically engaged, here's what his daughters learn. They learn things because of what dad said. And I've been saying this for years. And so I think it was September, October of this year, I was at the Parents as Teachers Conference, National Conference in St. Louis. I have 250, almost 300 home visitors, 99.9% women. And I'm talking about this issue. And I said, we at a young age learn that, when our dad tells us something and our mom tells us something, even if it's the same thing, it has a different impact. And I said, we learned at a pretty early age that moms will lie to you. And of course, everybody's like, what did he say? And I tell them, I know this is true because when I was 7, my mom told me I was cute. We have the pictures. That woman was lying, right? And I needed somebody telling me I was cute, but my dad never told me I was cute. My dad told me I was fat. My dad told me I was strong, but he never told me I was cute. And he was true on both of those, by the way, particularly at 7. But I asked these ladies in the room after I made that statement, I said, when your mom says you're beautiful, do you believe it? And I had honestly never asked that question to a group of women ever. I had made statements like that. I had said a few things around that, but I had never just asked a large group, when your mom says you're beautiful, do you believe it? And I kid you not, 80 to 90% of the people in the room simultaneously said, no. And then they kind of looked around like, they looked around like, what just happened? Hey, yeah, okay, we got our bouncers on that. So I was kind of blown away by that too, because I know what this means and I know what this says. But I said, okay, but if your dad says you're beautiful, do you believe it? Almost the same kind of response, but yes. So dad's first job is to tell his daughter, you are beautiful. John Eldredge, in his book Wild at Heart, said that boys want to know that they have what it takes. Like, do I have what it takes? So that's why boys climb trees, jump off rocks, tackle huge men, drive fast cars, chase wild women. Whatever we think we can do to prove that we have what it takes is what boys want to know. That's a girl's question too, but it's not her first question. A girl's first question, he says, is, do you delight in me? Ladies, you will go to a conference or an office where it's only women. You're not there to impress one man on the planet. You're going where all women are, but yet when you get dressed, you pick your special earrings, you pick your special shoes, you pick your special outfit, and even though you don't say it out loud, you're like, I hope they find me delightful. Most of us guys, when we go to work, whether it's all men, all women, whatever, most time when we get up, we go, yeah, that'll work, right? That's not our first question. Now, I wear polos and I wear jeans because I'm trying to prove to people that I have what it takes so much that I don't have to wear a suit to impress people. That I don't have to wear a suit because I'm the boss of my own company, right? And I know people that wear ties and things to show that they're important enough to wear a tie. But that's a boy's first question. But a girl's first question is, do you delight in me? And so a dad's first job is to say, you're beautiful. Now, that's not the only thing he says to his daughter. And when we see these great kids, this is what we also know. He also says, you're smart. You're beautiful. You're smart. The other thing is, you can do anything you want. And here's how you hit the softball. Here's how you shoot the basketball. Here's how you whoop every butt on the block. You're beautiful. You're smart. You can do whatever you want. And when dads do that and have that kind of relationship with their daughters, then their daughters don't listen to negative cultural norms. They're not looking for a 16-year-old boy to tell them that they're beautiful because my daddy already did, right? And I know some girls that have been raised by fantastic fathers, and the fact that they picked a boy at all was amazing. And when I know these ladies and I meet these young men that they have kind of chosen, I said, you have no idea how picky this young lady is. You also have no idea what her father will do to you if you don't treat her like the princess that she is. And by the way, I'll be right behind him. And some of the most powerful women I know are the ones that had a dad that said, you're beautiful, you're smart, you can do anything you want. So we know that when fathers are involved in the early life of children, this is 18 months to 36 months, but just like we talked about earlier, we also know this is true for 0 to 18 months as well. Children are less likely to have separation anxiety from the mother of or the father when they begin school or even daycare or Head Start, right? And so here's what we know about this. Why is that? And, when we talk about separation anxiety, it's kind of the opposite. What we mean is they have better attachment, and because they have better attachment, they can go other places. So when dads are caregivers, kids handle separation anxiety better. And here's why that is. So what a child learns is, my mom always takes care of me, and she's really good at it. And then if dad's engaged, what they learn is dad can take care of me too. Not quite like mama, but he does okay. He does pretty good. And he does better when she's around, but he still does pretty good when she's not there, right? One of those deals like we talked about last week. And then mom and dad trust others to take care of me as well. And so what the child learns is mom can take care of me. Dad's the other than mom, so he can take care of me. So if mom can take care of me and dad can take care of me, then this other person can take care of me. My oldest son was probably as co-parented as any kid ever. I was home during the summer. I took him to the babysitter, picked him up from the babysitter. I did that work. I stayed home with him on the weekends when mom went away. We would spend, a Saturday together. He would run around with me when he was really, really small. As soon as he could walk, Home Depot trip was a 2-hour trip, and I only got 3 things, but we were doing that stuff because we were both hanging out with our kid. So when it came time for Jake to go to kindergarten, he's like, hey, I see mom, I see dad, I see Legos, I'm out. Y'all come pick me up at 3:00. Because he knew I can trust other people to take care of me because mom does it, and someone other than mom, dad, can take care of me. My youngest stayed home with his mom while I was a principal, and I was home every night. But the reason I'm no longer a principal is I was not home every night. I was out of my mind. I was zombied up. I was not present, to the point where I think he was probably 3 years old. I said, here, let me tie your shoes. And he said, dads can't tie shoes. Now, that was not the breaking point for me, but I can tell you it got my attention. Like, what do you mean kids can't tie? Because that's not what I did, right? And so when we decided we needed to make a change because of some of that, then both my wife and I both went back to the classroom. So that means Josh had to have different care. He went to a friend of ours 3 days out of the week and went to a Mother's Day out every Tuesday and Thursday. It was our job to take our child to Mother's Day out. For 9 months, we peeled a screaming kid off of us, pushed him through the door, and watched him paste himself against the window for 9 months. Why? Because mom's the only one that can take care of me. No one else has ever taken care of me, and I don't trust these suckers in here, Legos or not. And so he had a different set of separation anxiety than his older brother because of how he was parented at the time. Now he has no separation anxiety. He's like, I love you, mom and dad. I'll see you whenever I want. And he's really, as the youngest child, really proven that independence. And we know part of it is all these pieces working together, that he's a man, that he wants to be seen that way. All those things come into play. Guess what? That was an impact from when he was 2. And so preschoolers with involved fathers have stronger verbal skills than those with less involved fathers. That's what we talked about earlier. But here's the other thing we know. When moms read to kids, kids learn to read, they learn to love to read, and they learn to love books. We need moms reading to kids. It's very important that moms read to kids. And when they do so, they do it like a mom. So what we also know is that when dads read to kids, they learn to read, they learn to love to read, and they learn to love books as well. But the interesting part is moms don't read like dads and dads don't read like moms. So what does that mean for the child? When a dad reads to his kids, then the kid's verbal skills can go up by up to 15%, which doesn't happen when moms read to them. Okay. Now, that doesn't mean mom's doing anything wrong. I mean, dad's doing something different. So again, I work with a lot of teachers and moms who are teachers who are moms read a lot the same. And the big bad wolf said, little pig, let me in. Kids love it. Kids in school are sleeping. Kids at home are sleeping. I asked my dads, how many of you sit in with mom while she's reading the kids and fall asleep? Tons of dads raise their hand. Right? It's amazing when moms read to kids. When dads read to kids, we tend to read a little different. When dads read to kids, we say, and the big bad wolf said, little pig, let me, and the kids are screaming, ah! Right? And mom's like, what's going on in there? It's like, we're reading. And mom's like, not like that. No, exactly like that. Now, maybe not at bedtime. We can talk about that in a second. But when dads read differently than mom, kids get an idea that language can be several different things instead of just what mom does when she reads. Again, it's amazing when moms read. Dad, again, is the other. Part of his value is just being the other, much less the fact that he does it much differently than mom. So I tell that story in my schools all the time. I can't tell you how many times I've told this story where when we say, what are you going to do different because of this workshop? Dads say, I'm going to read more to my children. It makes a huge impact on their learning, on their self-confidence, on all the things that we know. But I tell this story all the time. And I had an assistant principal in Plano, Texas one time, heard me say that, and she couldn't wait to get the program over. And she stopped me because that happened at my house just the other night. And I said, what happened? She said, I was walking past my daughter's room, and I walked past the room and my husband was wrapping the book to my daughter. I'm like, that's awesome. I go, did the book rhyme? She goes, not at all. I said, that's awesomer. And I said, and your daughter hated it? She goes, no, she loved it. And now I can't read that book because I don't read like daddy. And so we know mom has a great place. Dad has a great place, and they're not supposed to be the same place. They're not supposed to be the same perspective. They're not supposed to be the same style. And so if we can understand that dad's got a different place, but also when he does these things differently, it makes a huge impact. Now, this is educational for sure, right? This is all about school when we look at this research. So when the dad knows who the teacher is, visits school 2 to 3 times a year, asks the children regularly about what's going on at school, which is we're actually changing some of our things this year because they're not going to school, but they're still doing school. So we're actually changing some of the questions that we provide for dads every day, because we can't say, what did you do in class? Because you did it in the living room or in the kitchen. So when dads are involved, just that way, they know who the teacher is, they ask questions about school, they attend 2 to 3 events a year. Those kids are more likely to get A's and B's, less likely to repeat a grade, more likely to be involved in extracurricular activities, less likely to get in trouble in the office or honestly with the law. Why is this important? In your community, in our community, in all the communities in which I work, we talk about the school to prison pipeline. You want to know how to stop that? You can do all the equity in school you want, but if you don't have somebody else on the team for this kid, there's not anything you can do in school that's going to stop some of that for a kid that has that gap. That only has that one person, even if they're working so hard. The chances of them being successful are so much less. Now, we all know somebody that was successful with a single mom, but almost every time you sit down and get their story, somebody else was on that team. And that's not to minimize mom's job. It's actually to let us know that mom's doing everything she can. What I'm not going to do is take and tell every single mom that didn't have the outcome she wanted for her kids that she didn't do a good job, that she wasn't enough. She was everything she could be, but in the life of a kid, they need a mom, they need a dad, or they need somebody to play that role. In these kids that don't have a dad in their life that have these great outcomes, seriously, 99% of the time, there's a pastor, a coach, a brother, an uncle, a grandfather. There's somebody playing that role. Sometimes it's another woman playing that role, but somebody is playing that role of setting parameters and helping them get themselves safely into more risky situations, into stretching themselves, into being frustrated. And so we know that. So we know that when dads are involved, when they share meals, when they spend leisure time together, when they help with homework and reading, we know that leads to academic success. We also know that it leads itself to better outcomes socially. They're more likely to be appreciated by their peers, right? They're less likely to be in trouble with the law. They're more likely to pursue not only a high school diploma, but postgraduate work. They're more likely to go to a trade school or a college because their dad was engaged. They actually delay the onset of sexual activity as a teenager, both boys and girls. Some of the research I don't talk about a whole lot. If I've got a room full of dads and daughters, I love throwing this out because it freaks them out. But if a dad is physically engaged with his daughter, again, hugs, touch, wrestling, rough and tumble play with their daughters as much as the son, then because of his activity, he can delay the onset of puberty of her first menstruation by up to 6 months, just by his presence in her life. And everybody's like, how is that possible? Couple of things. Her situation where there's less stress in her life changes how she approaches her hormonal life. We have kids that are reaching puberty at a much younger age. And we know some of that is environment, chemicals in our systems, chemical in all our system, food system, water systems, everything. But the other thing we know is when you look at the numbers, kids that don't have a father around are more likely to not only be sexually active sooner, but part of the reason that they're sexually active sooner is they reach puberty sooner. And again, that's environmental, but environmental means the world they live in, but also the home they live in. And so I haven't met a dad yet that didn't say he would love to delay the onset of that in his life for his daughter. And so we always tend to have them as pretty big fans of that kind of idea, that when dad's involved, it changes our hormones and how those things work for us as well, particularly, like I said, in our young daughters. And so this is where we're going to go next. We can go back and look at some of these things. I want to take some of your questions because I think it'll lead us to talk about, okay, but what does this research and other research show? What I wanted to do is lay this out as a base of the research that when dads get involved, my phone just picked up and started listening to me. Sorry. I was like, who's saying the same thing I am? But we want to lay that out. But, I want you to think about, so what does that mean for the work that you're doing? What does that mean when you can tell dads this? So let's say you're working with dads that are really struggling with a lot of challenges. What does this matter to them? Well, when you can tell a dad that what they do matters for the success of their kids, that's a huge deal. Last week, when we asked the ladies in the room, finish this sentence, when my child becomes an adult, I want them to be blank. 85%, I think, put happy. When I asked the men in the room, even though there weren't as many men in here, when I said, what do you want finish the same sentence, they said successful or responsible. So if you want to help a dad, let him know that his role is very important in the success of his child. And as always, I have a story for you, but I will talk about that in a minute. So I'm going to switch over here. Jada, Cindy, let me know. Okay, Cindy, I see that you said, we certainly see this in our work. Please explain. I'm going to go to grid for a minute.
It was when you were talking about the women seeking that affirmation from men.
Right.
When they don't receive that from their fathers, one boyfriend to the next boyfriend to the next boyfriend, really without a pause in between, sometimes pregnant from one man, but involved with another one now.
Mm-hmm.
Something that we see pretty regularly.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of work around what we call the father wound. And the interesting, elders wrote about it, John Bly wrote about it. There's a lot of work. I like that work. I appreciate that work. My problem with some of that is that's all we ever talk about instead of the solution. And what I know is the best dad in the world still wounds his child because we as human parents are not enough in the long run for our kids. That's where my faith comes from, but it's basically inevitable, right? Not that you have to, and not that you don't work at not wounding your children, but you're going to do it some way because we put so much into our parents, right? Those of you that are working with kids in foster care, those of you that are working with kids that don't have a dad around. One of the things that we try to let people know is if a child has a father that is deceased, that passed away, let's say while in the life of this child, that child has way less grief than a child that has a dad that walks out or divorces or leaves. Because most children, even though they've got to work through it sometimes, don't feel like dad made a choice to die and leave them. But yet they always have to deal with the fact that if my dad's not here, he made a choice. A lot of hardworking single moms that are doing great things for their kids and showing great care have children that become angry and violent at them, even though they're providing the care, because they're blaming mom. And again, they may know something we don't, but most of the time it's not mom's fault, particularly the way the kid sees it. But the kid thinks if my mom was nice enough, sweet enough, sexy enough, whatever they think about their mom, my dad would still be here. And that's not the true story, but the child's wanting some reason to know why their dad is not in the picture. What I can tell you from the 10-week classes that we did in child support, there's a lot of guys that don't walk out. There's a lot of guys that get locked out. There's a lot of guys that get pushed out. There are guys that when they've gone through hurting things because they don't handle their grief well, they walk out. And they're not trying to be deadbeat, but they're not getting the help they need and they're not getting the support they need. And so they're not always deadbeat. Sometimes we call them dead broke or dead bolt. They get locked out. So, and we know what that means for kids. It's one of the reasons I got into this work, seeing the devastation of kids in my middle school when they didn't have a dad engaged. The other piece was seeing dads in the home, but still weren't engaged. And kind of find out I became one of those persons for a while as well. Any other questions?
There one earlier, this is from Constance. It said, what is the impact of a strong male role model, such as a grandfather, that is actively involved with female parents?
Number one, it can't be understated, right? But here's the challenge we have, at least in the work. It is not a dude, right? We're just not looking for a male. When I first started doing this work in Head Start and early Head Start, because the mindset was dads don't want to be around and dads don't care for their kids, that was the mindset. Then they called it male engagement. Like, we just need to get a dude in here. Well, that's not what helps a kid. What a kid is looking for is a father. And Henry Biller, who we showed you some of his research earlier, he's the one that said originally that children have a dad-shaped hole in their heart. And so what we have to understand is if a dad is not around, then somebody has to play that role. That's one of the reasons we laid that out last week, is because we don't just need a dude. We don't just need a guy in here. We need a guy to play this role. And you've got to understand what the importance of that role is. What does that look like and why? So a granddad, an uncle, and like I said, a lot of kids that I've seen be successful with a single mom have this whole team around them of pastors and coaches and teachers, you know, that are in there and engaged. Single dads also have to have the same thing because they can't be the nurturer and the one setting parameters. They got to make a choice because you can't be in two places at one time. So yes, we want other male role models. I had a great dad, but I also had mentor male role models. You can't discount that. The challenge is sometimes the reason we went away from male engagement is because we had a lot of moms that were picking their boyfriend to come with the kid instead of the father of the child, because it was her preference, not the child's preference. So because we advertise in schools to bring your dad to school and we give the invitation to the kid, then we let the kid decide, do I have a dad around? If I have a dad around, is it somebody that I trust? If he is, I'll invite him, or I have a relationship with my dad or whatever. But if he's not, who else would I like to involve? And you also learn from that. It could be granddad. It could be mom's boyfriend. Maybe he's a great guy. We've had kids that have actually asked the guy that used to date mom to come to dad's day. Like, Mom, can I ask Steve to come? Yeah, I'm not dating Steve anymore. I know, but Steve was cool. The interesting part was when the kid called Steve, Steve showed up. So the kid knew what was up, knew he had some kind of relationship with them. So kids are looking for that role, not just a guy. And I think that's important. Same thing with mentoring. I think mentoring is important, but if we're circumventing the dads because we don't think they're going to be there, and we bring in mentors before we really give a lot of effort to bringing in the father, we're definitely cheating the father, but we're really cheating the child, because the mentor will come and the mentor will go. If we connect the dad to his child, there's a great chance the dad won't ever go. The dad will be there if he ever gets that chance to connect.
I didn't see any other questions per se in the chat. I think a lot of people were impressed. But it's pretty interesting when you started talking about the delay of the onset of puberty for girls.
Like, what?
Yeah, there was one. That's interesting stuff. It's something I wasn't aware of.
So here's another, let's talk about hormones for a minute. Isn't that what everybody signed up to do this afternoon? So we didn't talk about it at the birth of the child. So when the child is born, they have smells. And I don't mean the smells that we all know about, pheromones. And so even to the point where when a woman decides to be a mother, in other words, she's adopting a newborn child, and she has decided to take on the role as mom. When she holds that newborn child in her arms, she connects chemically with the pheromones in that child's body, so much to the point of perhaps even at times lactating. Did not go through the trauma of childbirth, but has almost the same hormonal profile at the time that she takes on this child. And not so drastically, that happens. Now, the same thing happens when you put, this is why I think what we do in hospitals can be so important. When a father holds his child for the first time, and really, honestly, should be the second person to hold that child. Maybe the first one to hold him to give him to mom. But a lot of times, particularly with our teen parents, because nobody likes this guy, like he was the only one in the room when this child was conceived, he's the 12th or 15th person to hold his own baby. And that's not right by the baby, and it's not right by the dad. The other thing that I tell parents of teen parents is, I understand you don't want a 15 or 16-year-old dad of your grandchild. But if you don't engage them now, your 5-year-old grandchild will not have a 20-year-old father around. So we've got to deal with what we've got to get to where we want to be. And, shutting these guys out, even as irresponsible as they may be, as young and immature as they may be, they're not going to mature unless we give them a chance to do that and support them through that role, much like we do moms. We also see it where moms are not supported in their role. And so mom doesn't grow out of her immaturity, and the child is basically raised by the grandparents. We do the same thing to dads, and yet we blame the dad for that as much as anything. But when a man holds his child, particularly on that day of birth, his testosterone goes down and estrogen goes up. Now, I don't tell a lot of dads that because it freaks them out, but it's not long lasting. But I think it's what probably keeps us from eating our young, right? But because our testosterone drops and our estrogen goes up, we take on a more nurturing stance. We become less aggressive around everything. Those of you that have had kids know, you're like, I don't know why I'm crying. Well, you're crying because it's amazing. You're also crying because you're having an estrogen rush, and you've never had one of those, most likely. And so it's interesting that we are not, just like you said, we're not talking about these things that happen to dads. Right? We're not talking about how they get shut out of childbirth. We're not talking about how they get shut out of early childhood programs, right? And we've got to work on that. So I want to remember a question you asked earlier through the email, but I was going to see if you had any other comments or questions before we went to that.
I didn't see any other questions. I would like to just go back and just state briefly, watched a training from a UT last week with a fatherhood group, and they were talking about the infant mortality rate and how that was affected by fathers who were present and fathers who were not present. And I just, dads, I think sometimes think that they're just there to support mom, but they don't realize the impact they have on baby.
Yeah.
And it's important for us to know that so we can share that with them. It's significant. It's significant.
Well, it's interesting that when we tell all these guys at school that when you read to your kids, their verbal skills go up by up to 15%, which doesn't happen when moms read to them. Man, they're all walking out like, I've been trying to tell her about my reading skills. I had a dad, came here in Springtown, Texas. I live in Springtown, Texas, home of the Fighting Porcupines, just so you know. My grandmother was a porcupine. My dad was a porcupine. I was a porcupine, and I raised 2 porcupines. So here at Springtown ISD, we have a couple of rednecks. Actually, we have a couple of people that aren't. And the dad came to the morning session where I said that. So we're going into our pre-K session in the afternoon because I don't want to leave my half-day pre-K parents out. And he brings the wife back to the session, and he points at me and goes, that's the guy that said I read better than you. I said, hold up, Hoss. I did not say that. I said you read differently. But it's what dads want to gravitate towards. It's the same thing that you're talking about, Cindy, when we have these guys at these really important junctures, birth of their child, baby well checks, kindergarten check-in, daycare check-in, kindergarten roundup. We do it at 2 p.m. when dads can't be there. It's hard enough for moms to be there, and most of them are struggling because they're working or whatever. It's not good for our parents in general. But we definitely do things where it's not always easy for dad to get there, or we don't include them. That's been probably the bulk of our work over 20 years. But what we know is if we can tell a dad what his role is, once he knows how important it is, he begins to embrace it. So we have this 10-week class. And when we first started teaching this class, what I learned was child support court is an equal opportunity court. They don't care what color you are. They don't care what your education is. They don't care what your economic status is. If you owe money, you go into jail if you don't pay your money. It may be $87 a month. It may be $3,800 a month. I had those dads in the same class. Had a dad that had 7 kids by 5 or 6 different moms. Ex-con, been in a couple of 3 times. And he's sitting through class, and he gets really agitated one night. And he goes, it don't matter. And I'm like, what are you talking about don't matter? He says, it doesn't matter what you do as the dad. And I'm like, how is that? What are you even talking about? What have we been talking about for the last several weeks? He said, it don't matter. He said, I've got a brother that's a lawyer, a sister that's a doctor, and look at me, and I won't use everything he said. He said, I'm an F up. And nobody in the room disagreed with that necessarily, but we're like, what? And he said, so it doesn't matter what you do. Your kids are just going to turn out like they want to turn out. And he was one of 7 kids because I knew his story. And I said, how many kids you got? And he told me, he said 7. I said, okay, name them. It don't matter. I said, name them. And again, I'm usually not this smart. I don't know if this is the spirit getting me or just really good luck. And he goes, and he just angrily named off all 7 kids. And I said, okay, you had a brother that was a lawyer, a sister that was a doctor. You've been in the joint several times. You tell me which kid that you're raising are you going to send to prison? Which one are you going to give me the name of the child that you're okay with going to prison? And needless to say, he got even angrier. And he goes, it doesn't matter. I said, it does matter. Give me a name. And he finally, we went back and forth like this, and he finally got up and stormed out. I don't know if I reached him, but I will tell you, and again, I'm not this smart. It was all luck, but I reached the other 20 guys in that room because that's exactly the point. Our children are going to make their own choices, but we've got to give them every choice possible that they can make. If we don't do our job as moms and dads, and if we don't let dads reach their full capacity as a father, then they're reducing the number of choices their kids have. And so we really need to look at that. And that's why I think you guys being here and all the things that you guys represent, right? All the things that you guys do, whether it's early childhood, whether it is absolute fatherhood work, whether it's probation work, whether it's job services, whatever you're doing, please understand when I said that earlier, I don't discount any of that work, I just see fatherhood as very specifically in the role as a parent. Some of this other tends to be helping a man be a better man. If a man's a better man, he'll be a better father. What we've learned is if you help a man take on his role as a father, he will do more work and be more motivated to be a better man. Like we had this 10-week class and we did not provide job services, barely provided job leads. But by the time, I think it was 62% of the guys that weren't employed at the first part of that 10-week class were employed by the end of it. Not because we gave them all these job services, but because they part of it was they worked through the grief of the disillusion of their family. And the other part was they realized that what they were doing was important to their kids. And somewhere along the lines, they thought it didn't matter. And we reminded them that they mattered quite a bit. And so we want you to, kind of understand that and realize that. And so I don't know if did that quiet everybody down? Some of you are just like, what just happened? But I want to hear from you guys for a minute.
I think in our society, there's so much being said, or at least in my world anyway, about infant mortality and morbidity and all of those things. And the father's input into that equation is never even mentioned.
Right.
It's all the comorbidities of the mom and all that stuff, but that needs to be spoken. And our society has done such a good job of emasculating men.
Right.
But why in the world would you want to be a dad and step up and be made fun of?
Yeah, and be discounted for what you're doing. And the interesting part
Right.
about that is same thing. And so I will tell you 20 years ago when I was doing, when I first started doing this work, if we could get a session in a conference about fathers, it was a miracle. And if we got the session, it was the last session of the day on the last day in the smallest room, right? And like I told you, we've been very blessed to get bigger rooms. We did a Head Start conference about 6 years ago. We did 22 hours of training in that one conference because it was a big enough deal. And it's gone down and it's come back up, but it hasn't gone away, thank goodness. But it's that whole point of moms aren't everything, nor are dads everything, but everybody's important, and we need to talk about that. But what we also know, and this is part of staff training, and I have to talk to, particularly when I'm in a room full of females, that when we're talking about working with the father, we're talking about working with the father of typically the child that you're concerned about, right? Most of you are in some kind of child work at one level or another. Even if you're working directly with the dad, you're doing it again for the sake of their children. So if we're really concerned about that kid, then it doesn't matter what that dad looks like or we think he looks like. Because I can't tell you how many women that have a bad experience with their own father or the father of their children, and therefore that bias comes in to impact all the work we do. If you're in desperate communities and you see these young ladies that, have this situation and you meet enough of them that had a guy that checked out, then we think all men check out. But when you get down to the story, you find out that her family told him, or she told him, I don't want you around. Part of that's a policy issue. We could talk for a long time about that. But part of that is, again, nobody's thinking about the child. The child benefits from the father being around. Now, the good news is that in our inner city neighborhoods, this is where so many people, their first thought goes to African-American communities. But in African-American communities, in inner city communities, 75% of the kids that don't live under the same roof with their father have regular access to their father. Now, part of the problem with that research is regular access can be up to one visit a year. But what we know is a lot of kids have way more visits than that. And what we know is those dads are directly accessible in those communities. When people tell me these kids don't have dads, I'm like, well, that's biologically impossible. The other part is if you look around and when we do invite the kids to invite their dads, I don't go to a school where we don't have a full cafeteria because the kids know where dad is or who they want to play that role. So there are kids that don't bring, but 65 to 70% of the kids in any of our schools or Head Starts bring a father or father figure to our events consistently. And so we know there's a lot more access, but what we see is only the mom or we take on that mindset. And I'll tell you one more thing and I want to go back to questions. And I'm telling myself that more than I'm telling you guys that. But so I was involved, the class that I wrote, the 10-week class, was involved in a research project where moms were losing the parental rights to their kids and the kids were about to be adopted out. What they weren't doing was seeking out the father. to see if he wanted access to his own kids. They weren't even seeking him out for his parental rights. Because the mindset among professionals, typically in child protective, was if mom's this bad off, then dad must be horrible. Like that was a constant mindset. And what we began to learn through that project was that maybe mom and dad were on drugs and mom took off with the kid. Sometimes dad got clean, mainly because he just lost everything. Or mom got off on drugs. Dad may or may not have been on drugs. Mom got off on drugs and vanished. The dad never knew where the kid went. Couldn't find him, couldn't do the work, but nobody sought to ask this man out for the sake of his child as much as for the sake of him. Because again, if mom's this bad, the dad's always got to be worse. And they just continue to find that that's not always the case. There were plenty of cases where, dad was the one that kind of drug everybody down and that was the case, but that was not the case, but that was the assumption on that part. So we have to understand our bias plays a role. Those of you that had a positive father also have a bias. When a young man comes in and doesn't look like your dad did or does, then we like, he's not a good dad because I know what a good dad looks like because I had a good dad. Well, you have a good dad because he's like in his 60s because you moved out. Of course he's a good dad. You're no longer at home. But at the age of 24, when he was a young dad, he might not have been as good a dad as this young man, regardless of how they looked and dressed. And so we have to make sure that our bias, which could be positive or negative, doesn't impact the work we do with fathers. So any other questions or comments on that?
Yes, I have a comment. I had a bias because I worked 4 years in the Federal Bureau of Prisons as an administrator. And I had a bias because I looked at, why aren't you as good a dad as I am? Mm-hmm. When I first started off, I worked shifts and everything like that. And I was there for my kids. And how come you can't be the same? And that I had to look at that. And that's why now I'm a mentor and working with dads through the church and families and single moms, which understand. I get it now. But when I was coming up, I was like, man, you're worthless. Why aren't you doing this for your kids?
Right.
How can you parent from prison? So. Right.
Well, and you go back to their family of origin, which is huge. So I'm in a group called the Crucible Project, which is a men's group, men and women group now. And a lot of these guys that are in this group, they struggle. They do work around their father wound, the fact that their dad wasn't around. He was alcoholic. He was abusive. He did all these things. A lot of our guys in that 10-week class came through the same thing. So the third week of that class, what we did was we had them talk about, what did your father give you that you would like to keep? And a lot of them struggled to think of something, right? Because they were so negative. And then we said, what one thing would you like to get rid of from your father that you don't want to pass on to your kid? And that was a little bit easier to them. But we went through this whole conversation exercise, a very powerful tool. And then we said, so what does this mean to you? What did you learn out of this? And a lot of them realized that they said they would never father like their father did, except they realized that their dad was an alcoholic and they struggled with alcoholism, right? Their dad was abusive and they really struggled not to do the same thing to their kid, even though they swore they wouldn't. And we have to talk to our dads about, you have to make a conscious decision to return to what you know, right? If at the point of stress, you're going to return to what you know. And so that's such a great point, because again, when you see where they're coming from and what they're trying to do, or if you can get that full story, that's probably one of the biggest things that I promote is the actions of a father don't always tell you what his heart is. The good things I do as a dad, a lot of them came very natural to me, not because I'm a good guy, but because I had a good father that example was just what I expected to do. There were some things that I had to change that even my dad would say I needed to change, that he didn't want me to repeat that he did. I think I can tell this without crying. The day my oldest was born, probably not going to make it. My dad, everybody else was looking through the window. My dad came around to find me and he told me congratulations. And then he said, don't be as hard on him as I was on you. And my first indication was, aha, I knew you were hard on me, because he had never said it, even though I knew. And the other thing was, yeah, you're right. Right. And I knew what his heart was. Of course, I want to go, oh yeah, sure. Don't treat your grandkid bad, but you can treat me however you want. But so hang on. I'm going to go off screen for a minute because I got to find the book. Good. I knew it was right here. So I'm back. Okay, back in the camera. If you want to read a great book about exactly what we're talking about, Catherine Eden out of John F. Kennedy School for Social Work at Harvard, her and her partner, he and she lived in Camden, lived in Philly, and they lived with inner city fathers for, I think, 2 or 3 years to do this research. And I know the hearts of guys. I've worked with almost 250,000 dads face to face. I've listened to a ton of stories, and this book was still great because it just explained even more so what the exact dads you're talking about, the guys that have been in and out of prison, in and out of crime, in and out of drugs use, and drug selling, all those things. It explains to them what their motivation was. Why is this guy having so many kids by so many different women? It's not that he's just playing Rolling Stone, but he gets in this relationship, probably casually. A child is born. He's committed to being a good father, but the relationship is not built for either one of the adults to support them being a family. They've got all these challenges, plus they don't bring all the supports they need. And so he feels like he failed. Somewhere in there, she walks out, he walks out, he can't make a living, whatever it is, but he feels like a failure. So he moves on, but he wants to try it again. And so it is not just a guy out there being irresponsible, even though we want them to be more responsible with that behavior. It is a guy trying to find the secret, trying to do it right. Right. And what we're not doing is supporting these guys because exactly like you say, when they step into challenges, we want to tell them you shouldn't have those challenges when they're quite real. So really good book, heavy book, pretty dense in the research and stuff. I don't know if it's a beach read, but it's a really great book. The other book that you got some of the research from today is called Father Need by Kyle Pruitt. Absolutely opposite work of Catherine Eden's work in the fact that he was studying stay-at-home dads when that first became a phenomenon. And what he looked at was, if a dad takes on a more domestic role and less of a breadwinning role, does it change his role as a father? And what he found was typically no. Like dads are dads, moms are moms. And that was a big influence on our work as well. We'll send this out to you in an email if you guys have signed up. But one of the things we're going to do, probably starting September, we're going to start a fatherhood leadership training group. And this will be one of the book studies on this. And there's a couple of other ones that are pretty serious scholarly work. It's easy. It's an easy read. It's not like real technical, but it's just heavy in research and heavy in stories. So it's not just a light read, but it's so good. And I read it just this past year, even after doing all the work that I've done. So I appreciate your input on that. Anything else? Any other questions or comments?
Mike,
All right.
do you have the 2 questions that emailed to you? Were you able to address those?
Yeah. Okay. So let's talk about those. I was going to do that a minute ago. So one of the questions was, what about when you're working with a dad that he doesn't want to be involved? And this is kind of what we've been talking about, kind of skirted the issue a little bit. Our assumption is that he doesn't want to be involved. But what we have to understand is if you're a female, right, working with another female, you're going to approach her differently. And that approach is not always attractive or effective for him. Even if you're a male working with a female, our mode of practice tends to be, I wouldn't say feminine, but more friendly to women that we're working with, right? And just like you said, you're a great dad working in a prison as a Christian person, and that influences how we kind of see these guys, and we don't get to see the real guy there. And so one of the things we look at is, how is he being treated and how is he being brought in? Because he's a dad on the fringe is not going to be brought in by using the same thing you use for mom. Let's talk about that for a minute. So moms want their kids to be happy. So we talk about a lot of things about, here's how to make them comfortable in school. Here's how to make them get along with folks. Here's how to get them healthy, comfortable. And it's not soft necessarily, but it's about all of those things where the kid feels better. Yes, they're going to be successful, but we talk about, we want them to feel safe. We want them to feel comfortable. We want them to not have anxiety about going to school or anxiety about learning things or anxiety about their health, all those things. That's not our concern as dads a lot of times. But if you can talk to the dad about, do you want your child to be successful? Yes. When I talk to immigrant parents, I'm like, why did you do so much work and go through so much danger and peril to be here in this country? No matter how you got here, legal or illegal, I don't care. Why did you do that work? And every person, para futuro bueno para nuestros niños o hijos. Porque futuro bueno, we want a better future for our kid. Well, a better future is not just feeling comfortable. A better future is a better education. A better future is more opportunity. And so the way we've reached immigrant dads is by saying, here's the role you play in your child having better choices and more opportunity in the future. They don't have to go to college, but the more education they get means more opportunity. Most of our immigrant parents want their kids to go to college. But what we want them to understand is education is what's going to make the difference regardless of what path they take. And so when we look at these dads that stand back, what we want to do is we want to look at why he's standing back, and we don't want to look at our behavior or our practice. And so a lot of the work we do is talking about, when you look at your practice, why would a dad not want to be there? If you're in a group, if you're doing a parent group, but it's an open group session, dads don't want to do that. Not in a group of other women, not one run by women. Now, I have a lot of women that facilitate programs, but they facilitate, they don't teach. So our stuff is a lot of hands-on stuff that we do with dads and kids. The 10-week class, even though it is a 10-week curriculum with just dads in the room, it can still be facilitated by a woman because it's facilitated. The person is leading the participants through the activities and the processes. That's what's doing the teaching. So you don't have to have authority per se as a facilitator. You have to have the authority of the facilitator, but you don't have to be a super dad, or you don't have to be a dad at all if you can lead men through the process. But you've got to understand how men work. You've got to understand what makes it safe for men. And a lot of things we do that make it very safe for women are the last thing that make it safe for men. Women want a chance to be heard. They want a chance to talk. Guys are scared to death of that. They don't want to do that. You get a group of women together in a circle and say, how you guys feeling this week? What's been going on? 90 minutes later, you got to shut down the meeting, and you've gone through a box of Kleenexes and everybody shared something. And it's amazing. It's wonderful. There's not one thing wrong with that. Please understand, I'm not making fun of that. That's how it is. You ask a bunch of guys in a circle, how y'all doing? How do you feel today? You might as well say, who wants to take your clothes off first? Because that's exactly how it feels to a group of men. So they've got to have a safe environment as well. But when you walk into a room full of women and or men that think you're sorry before you even got there, like all of us in social service are serving families with challenges. Do you understand that a lot of us have a mindset that if they had a man or a real man or a man that was doing his job, they wouldn't have these challenges, which is not true. If you're uneducated, underemployed, have other challenges, right? Mental health, drug addiction, all those things. So we have to understand they feel responsible personally, and then we make them feel even more responsible for the situation for which we're working with them. Dads in a hospital get no second looks, right? When my oldest child, we both went to the baby well checkups. I would ask our male pediatrician questions about our kid, and he would turn and answer my wife. And I'm like, dude, I'm right here in the room. And then because of my schedule and because my wife was teaching, there were times when I took my child to the doctor by myself. And I would say, so what do we need to do? And he would start writing it down. And I was like, just tell me. And then he would tell me. And then I'd get home and my wife would say, what did he say? And I'm like, man, I wish he'd have written it down. But when I would go into a doctor's office with my kids, them other moms would take their kids away from me and my child. Like, I don't want the one I brought. He's broken. Why do I want to take another sick kid home with me? I'm not going to do anything to your kid. But when I went to the desk to get signed up, the condescending manner in which I was, I got 2 degrees. I got a tie on this day. I'm bringing my kid in, and they're treating me like I know nothing because I'm a dude. And so we have to understand our dads have that bias. And the first thing is to not talk to the dad through the mom, or talk to the dad. A lot of times we do this in child care. We talk to the dad through the child. Did you bring your dad today? You and your dad are going to go over here. And we never look the man in the eye. And they may not always be able to quantify that, but they know it. And so I would invite you to do just dad visits. Those of you that are home visitors, that's a big struggle, but that's one of the things we're really promoting. One of the things we're working on this year is a monthly video for early Head Start and early childhood programs. It's once a month in English and Spanish that you can share with those dads that speak specifically to them, that are activities for them and their child to do. This summer we're doing weekly, and we're finding out that weekly is too much for dads, too much for professionals to promote. So we're going to a monthly model. Now they'll have access to all those over the year, but there's a new one that comes out every month. And it's got to be specific to dads. So the same reason we do Bring Your Dad to School Day, we don't say bring your special friend. We want dads. Well, what about mom? Moms can come, but this is a dad program. And I can't tell you how much pushback we get when we do that, because all these kids don't have a dad. 100% of the kids in the country have a father. They don't have a father around, but more kids have fathers around than we know. And way more kids have fathers that care than we think. And so that may be my mic drop moment there. Any other questions or comments? Because we've already gone past y'all's time. Everybody's just muted, asleep. They're like, it's okay.
No, I think everybody's grateful. Got a lot of good feedback. Some people had to leave early, other things going on, but mostly really positive feedback from the information. I think you shared a lot of things that nobody had any clue about.
That's what makes me an expert. Find the most obscure stuff you can talk about, and all of a sudden you're an expert.
It does make you look smarter.
Yes, I need in the glasses. So
Yes.
With no lenses.
Yeah, y'all don't know that, but she gave away my secret. The reason my glasses don't reflect is because there's no lenses in them, because I never can get my lights right. So don't tell everybody else that, but that's our little secret. But it's funny if people are like, where'd you get those lenses? I'm like, I don't have any lenses, but I don't like the bags under my eyes, so I'm vain. Let's remember next week.
I've heard that Drew Carey does the same thing.
Oh, I don't know if I like that or not. I'm not really sure how I take it.
I'm right.
Let's see. Let me see if y'all know this guy. Oh, I can't find it. So I get Adam Savage a lot. Y'all know who Adam Savage is?
I think you showed him last week, didn't you?
Oh yeah, he was actually on the video last week, because everybody thinks I'm the Mythbuster guy.
You do resemble him.
A little bit. I've been stopped in the airport, so. I wanted to say.
Rather Drew Carey than him.
Yeah, Drew Carey. I don't know if I'm happy with that or not. I'm not really sure how to take that. But I'll take it. I'll take what I can get. I'll take his paycheck. How's that?
Yeah, agreed. What is the discussion next week?
So we're going to talk about kind of how we ended here. How do we put this in practice, and how we knock down the barriers in our programs? And so that lends itself to what I wanted to ask you guys. That question about that dad standing at the back of the meeting or the back of the session together, we want to hear from you guys. Let us know what your challenges are, on that, because I could address a lot of things, but I want to make sure we're addressing the right stuff. Because it's, like I said, we spend a lot of time in education, but we've done some of the other work, but we want to be as specific as we can be next week. And we want to talk about maybe you guys did a really good job at the first talking about what you do. And so we want to do a little bit more silo busting next week as well. You get to hear less from me, and I facilitate more, which is always a plus. And then the other piece is we want to make sure that you're spending your time as fruitfully as possible. But we'll send that out in an email. If you got this not through an email that somebody else sent it to you, drop your email in the chat. We save all that. And we'll make sure you make it to the list if you did not. So thank you guys for your time. Thank you guys for hanging here. And like I said, send those questions in, because that'll inform us of the direction we want to go next week to make sure we're making it worth your time, to talk about how to help dads in your particular situation overcome those barriers, or how we have to take down the barriers that we're actually putting up. And we don't always know that. So it'll be a little bit of both. And it's not about shame or guilt. It's about what's the best way to help the families with whom we work. We know you want to be effective.
Thank you so much. And thank you all for coming today and spending your time with us. We will see you.